The first day at Bellamy Academy. The grand gates of Bellamy Academy gleamed under the morning sun, their intricate wrought iron design standing as a symbol of tradition and excellence. For generations, Bellamy had been a bastion of elite education, its ivy-covered walls nurturing future leaders, innovators, and changemakers. Yet beneath the polished veneer of achievement lay a deeply entrenched culture of exclusivity, one that had gone unquestioned for too long. For 14-year-old Lena Carter, walking through those gates was supposed to be the start of something extraordinary. It was her first day at a school her mother, Naomi Carter, had dreamed of for years. Naomi, a single mother, had risen from humble beginnings to become a trailblazing tech entrepreneur. Her achievements had not only earned her wealth, but also the respect of an industry where women of color were still a rarity. Naomi's determination to give Lena the best education possible had led to Bellamy Academy. Lena stepped into the school grounds with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Her neatly pressed uniform matched those of her peers, but she couldn't ignore the whispers and sideways glances as she walked past clusters of students. Some pointed at her braided hair, others giggled as they exchanged quiet comments. She held her head high, pretending not to notice. The ornate halls of Bellamy were intimidating, adorned with oil paintings of headmasters past and plaques commemorating academic achievements. Lena finally found her way to room 312, where advanced history awaited, a class she was eager to excel in. Inside, Mr. Wallace stood at the front of the classroom. He was a tall man in his late 50s, his crisp gray suit and piercing blue eyes giving him an air of authority. He had taught at Bellamy for over 3 decades, his name synonymous with academic rigor and discipline. As Lena took her seat, Mr. Wallace scanned the room, his gaze lingering on her for a fraction longer than it did on the others. He began his lecture, his tone commanding and deliberate. Lena quickly realized that while Mr. Wallace's knowledge was vast, his interest in inclusivity was non-existent. The first hint came when she raised her hand to answer a question about the causes of the civil rights movement. He ignored her. Another student, a boy named Ethan, offered an answer, a muddled, incorrect response. Mr. Wallace nodded approvingly and moved on. At first, Lena dismissed it as an oversight, but as the weeks went by, the pattern became clearer. Her hand would remain unnoticed, her insights dismissed, her contributions to group projects overshadowed by classmates whom Mr. Wallace seemed to favor. Then came the day when his indifference turned into outright humiliation. It was during a discussion on Reconstruction-era policies. Lena, determined to participate, spoke up without waiting to be called on. Actually, the Freedmen's Bureau was crucial in providing education and support to formerly enslaved people, she said confidently. Mr. Wallace's eyes narrowed. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "while your enthusiasm is noted, I'd prefer if we relied on facts, not opinions." The room fell silent. A few students stifled giggles. Lena's cheeks burned as she sank back into her chair, her heart pounding with a mix of embarrassment and anger. The moment was a turning point. The whispers and stares in the hallways intensified. Some students began mimicking Mr. Wallace's tone when speaking to Lena, their mockery echoing through the corridors. That evening, Lena sat at the dinner table, her appetite gone. Naomi noticed immediately. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Lena hesitated, then began to recount the day's events, her voice trembling. She described the way Mr. Wallace had dismissed her, the way her classmates had joined in the ridicule. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. Naomi listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each word. When Lena finally fell silent, Naomi leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Lena," she said, "you are smart, capable, and deserving of every opportunity that school offers. No one, not even a teacher, has the right to make you feel otherwise. Trust me, we're going to handle this." That night, Naomi began her research. She scoured online forums, spoke to parents she knew from her professional network, and even reached out to former Bellamy students. Slowly, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Mr. Wallace had a history of targeting minority students, subtly undermining their confidence and discouraging their participation. His actions had gone unchallenged for years, shielded by the school's culture of silence. Naomi wasn't about to let it continue. She compiled every piece of information she could find, documenting Lena's experiences alongside testimonials from others. But Naomi also knew that confronting Mr. Wallace directly wouldn't be enough. She needed to address the systemic issue at Bellamy, the culture that allowed educators like him to thrive. The next day, Naomi requested a meeting with the school's administration. The headmaster, Dr. Ellis, was a polished, soft-spoken man who prided himself on maintaining Bellamy's pristine reputation. When Naomi laid out her concerns, he listened politely but offered little more than vague assurances. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Carter," he said. "But I assure you, Mr. Wallace is a respected member of our faculty. These allegations seem unlikely." Naomi's jaw tightened. She realized that the administration would do everything in its power to protect its own. If she wanted justice for Lena, she would have to take matters into her own hands. Later that evening, Naomi sent an email to a select group of Bellamy parents. The subject line read, "Standing against discrimination at Bellamy. A call to action." Within hours, replies began pouring in. Parents shared stories of their own children's experiences, many echoing Lena's. One mother described how her son had been discouraged from applying to advanced courses. Another parent recounted how her daughter had been publicly criticized for her accent during a presentation. By the end of the week, Naomi had organized a coalition of parents determined to challenge Bellamy's practices. Together, they crafted a detailed proposal for reforms, including mandatory diversity training for staff, an anonymous reporting system for discrimination, and a comprehensive review of faculty conduct. Naomi also reached out to a prominent journalist known for exposing injustices in education. She shared Lena's story, along with the testimonials she had gathered. The journalist agreed to publish an exposé, ensuring that Bellamy's secrets would no longer remain hidden behind its ivy-covered walls. As Naomi prepared for the battle ahead, Lena watched her mother with a mix of awe and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. Little did Bellamy Academy know, the storm was just beginning to brew. The storm begins. The day after Naomi Carter sent out her email, whispers of discontent spread across Bellamy Academy faster than anyone could have anticipated. Parents who had remained silent for years suddenly found a collective voice, emboldened by Naomi's leadership. The prestigious school, long viewed as untouchable, now faced its first real test of accountability. Lena, however, was oblivious to the growing movement her mother had sparked. She sat in advanced history that morning, her stomach churning as Mr. Wallace strolled into the room with his usual air of superiority. His gaze swept over the students, briefly resting on Lena before he began his lecture. She braced herself, knowing that today would likely bring another round of subtle jabs. Class. One by one, the parents shared their stories. A father named Javier recounted how his son, Marco, had been consistently overlooked for leadership roles despite his academic excellence. A mother, Priya, described how her daughter had been told by a teacher that her cultural clothing during a presentation was inappropriate for academic settings. Each story painted a damning picture of a school that prided itself on diversity in brochures, but failed to uphold those values in practice. Naomi took notes as they spoke, her resolve hardening with every account. By the end of the meeting, the group had agreed on their next steps. They would present their findings to the school board and demand immediate action. The exposé. While Naomi and the parents prepared for their confrontation with Bellamy, the journalist Naomi had contacted was hard at work. Sophia Trent was a seasoned reporter who specialized in uncovering injustices in education. Her articles had led to the resignation of corrupt administrators and the overhaul of discriminatory policies in several prestigious institutions. When Sophia received Naomi's email, she was struck by the depth of the stories it contained. It wasn't just about Lena. It was about an entire system that had allowed teachers like Mr. Wallace to thrive unchecked. Sophia immediately scheduled interviews with the parents Naomi had connected her to, as well as former Bellamy students who had faced similar challenges. Her article, titled Behind the Ivy: The Hidden Culture of Bias at Bellamy Academy, went live a week later. It detailed Lena's experience alongside those of other students, painting a vivid picture of the systemic issues plaguing the school. Within hours, the article began to gain traction online, shared by parents, educators, and activists across the country. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Alumni of Bellamy took to social media to share their own stories, some echoing the experiences described in the article, others expressing shock and disappointment at the institution they had once revered. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon, Bellamy Academy was at the center of a media firestorm. Mr. Wallace's reaction. Back in the classroom, Mr. Wallace remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside Bellamy's gates. He continued to conduct his lectures with the same condescension and superiority that had marked his teaching career. But as whispers of the expose began to circulate among students, the atmosphere in his classroom began to shift. Lena noticed it first. The same students who had laughed at Mr. Wallace's jabs now seemed more hesitant, their snickers replaced by furtive glances. A few even approached Lena after class to apologize for their behavior, though their words felt more like an attempt to distance themselves from Mr. Wallace than genuine remorse. It wasn't long before Mr. Wallace heard about the article. He dismissed it as sensationalism, convinced that his reputation as a respected educator would shield him from any serious consequences. But as the days passed, he began to notice changes. The headmaster, Dr. Ellis, called him into his office for a discussion. Parents began withdrawing their children from his classes, citing concerns about his teaching methods. For the first time in years, Mr. Wallace felt the ground shift beneath him. Lena finds her voice. At home, Lena was still processing the whirlwind of events. She was proud of her mother's determination, but couldn't shake the feeling of guilt for being the catalyst of so much upheaval. It wasn't until one of her classmates, a girl named Mia, approached her after school that Lena began to see things differently. "Hey," Maya said hesitantly, her eyes avoiding Lena's. "I read the article. I didn't realize how bad things were for you. I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." Lena was taken aback. Mia had always been one of the quieter students, blending into the background while others took center stage. Her apology felt sincere, and for the first time, Lena realized that her silence had been a form of complicity too. That evening, Lena approached her mother. "Mom," she said, "I want to help. I don't want this to just be your fight. I want to be a part of it." Naomi smiled, her eyes brimming with pride. "You already are, sweetheart. But if you want to do more, we'll figure out a way together." The school board's response. The growing pressure from parents, students, and the media forced the Bellamy School Board to take action. They announced a public meeting to address the concerns raised in Sophia Trent's article. Naomi and her coalition of parents were invited to present their findings, but Naomi knew this was just the beginning. As Naomi and Lena prepared for the meeting, Lena felt a newfound sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every student who had ever been made to feel small or unworthy, and she was determined to make her voice heard. The storm had begun, and there was no turning back. A mother's resolve. The Bellamy Academy Board meeting was scheduled for a Friday evening in the sprawling auditorium, where graduation ceremonies and fundraisers were typically held. This time, however, the grand room was set to host a confrontation unlike anything the school had seen before. By the time Naomi Carter and her coalition of parents arrived, the auditorium was nearly full. Rows of chairs were occupied by parents, students, teachers, and alumni who had come to witness what promised to be a heated discussion. Naomi had spent the past week preparing meticulously, reviewing every piece of evidence, organizing her thoughts, and rehearsing her speech. Lena sat beside her mother, clutching a notebook in her lap. She was nervous, But her mother's unwavering determination gave her strength. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt silenced or belittled at Bellamy. As the meeting began, the headmaster, Dr. Ellis, took the stage. He offered a polished, diplomatic opening statement, emphasizing Bellamy's commitment to excellence and inclusivity. But his words rang hollow, and the tension in the room was palpable. Tonight, Dr. Ellis concluded, "We are here to address concerns raised by members of our community. We are committed to transparency and to ensuring that Bellamy Academy remains a place of learning and growth for all." Naomi wasn't fooled by his carefully crafted words. She had seen this tactic before, corporate leaders using charm and vague promises to diffuse situations without making meaningful changes. But this time, she was ready. Speaking truth to power. When Naomi's name was called, she stood, adjusting the tailored blazer she had chosen deliberately to project confidence. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, and placed her notes in front of her. Taking a deep breath, she looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, others skeptical. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "My name is Naomi Carter, and I am the mother of Lynna Carter, a proud student of Bellamy Academy." Her tone was calm, but her words carried a weight that silenced the murmurs in the audience. Bellamy Academy has built its reputation on academic excellence, on preparing students to be leaders and innovators. But for all its accolades, there is a glaring issue that has gone unaddressed for far too long. The culture of bias and discrimination that undermines the very values this school claims to uphold. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "My daughter, Lena, has experienced this firsthand. Her contributions in class are dismissed, her intelligence questioned, and her presence marginalized. And she is not alone." Naomi began presenting her evidence, one piece at a time. She cited specific incidents involving Mr. Wallace, shared testimonies from other parents, and even played audio recordings of Mr. Wallace's dismissive comments, captured on Lena's phone. The room grew increasingly tense. Parents exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Wallace, seated near the front, shifted in his chair, his face reddening as Naomi continued. "This is not just about one teacher," Naomi said, her voice rising with conviction. "This is about a systemic problem, a culture that allows educators to demean and belittle students without consequence, a culture that prioritizes reputation over accountability." Naomi concluded her speech with a challenge to the board. Bellamy Academy has a choice tonight. You can dismiss these concerns and protect the status quo, or you can take real, meaningful action to create an environment where every student feels valued and respected. The question is, what kind of legacy do you want this institution to leave? The ripple effect. As Naomi returned to her seat, the room erupted into a mix of applause and murmurs. Lena looked at her mother with awe, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. Dr. Ellis attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the atmosphere had shifted. Parents began standing up, one after another, sharing their own stories. A father described how his son had been discouraged from pursuing STEM courses because of his dyslexia. A mother recounted how her daughter, a talented artist, had been told by a teacher that her work was too urban to be taken seriously. The stories kept coming, each one adding to the growing momentum. The board members, who had initially appeared composed and detached, now seemed uneasy. They exchanged hushed comments and scribbled notes, clearly unprepared for the wave of dissent washing over them. The pushback. Not everyone in the room was supportive. A small but vocal group of parents defended the school and its faculty, insisting that Bellamy's reputation was being unfairly tarnished. "This is a witch hunt," one parent declared. "My children have thrived at Bellamy. Maybe if some students focused more on their studies and less on playing the victim, they'd have similar success." The comment drew gasps and scattered applause, but Naomi refused to let it derail the conversation. She stood again, addressing the parent directly. "This isn't about playing the victim," she said firmly. It's about holding people accountable for their actions. It's about ensuring that every student, regardless of their background, has the same opportunities to succeed. If your children have thrived here, that's wonderful. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the experiences of those who haven't. Her words were met with more applause, and the dissenting parents fell silent. A lesson in courage. As the meeting stretched late into the evening, Lena found herself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. She thought about the humiliation she had felt in Mr. Wallace's class, the whispers in the hallways, the nights she had cried herself to sleep. But she also thought about her mother's unwavering support, the parents who had rallied behind her, and the courage it had taken to confront such a powerful institution. When the meeting finally ended, the board announced that it would conduct a formal investigation into the allegations and implement interim measures to address the concerns raised. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. As Lena and Naomi walked to their car, the cool night air felt refreshing after the intensity of the meeting. "Mom," Lena said quietly, "thank you for everything." Naomi smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "This is just the beginning, Lena, and I'm so proud of you for finding your voice. Together, we're going to make sure Bellamy lives up to its potential." Lena nodded, her confidence growing with every step. For the first time in weeks, she felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for every student who would walk through Bellamy's gates in the years to come. The storm had arrived, and while it had shaken the foundations of Bellamy Academy, it had also begun to wash away the complacency and silence that had allowed injustice to flourish. Breaking the silence. The investigation at Bellamy Academy began almost immediately after the board meeting. While the school administration publicly pledged transparency, the atmosphere within its prestigious walls became tense and uneasy. Teachers whispered in the faculty lounge, students speculated in hushed tones, and the once proud institution found itself under the magnifying glass of a curious and increasingly vocal community. For Lena Carter, the days following the board meeting felt surreal. Some students avoided her altogether, while others offered quiet words of support. A handful, emboldened by her mother's speech, began to speak out against their own experiences with discrimination and unfair treatment. For Lena, it was both empowering and overwhelming. The morning after. On Monday morning, Lena stepped onto the school grounds with a mix of nerves and determination. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "This is your school, Lena. You have every right to be here." Walking through the halls, Lena noticed a subtle but significant change. Eyes that once avoided hers now met her gaze with something akin to respect. A few students even nodded in acknowledgement, a silent gesture of solidarity. In her advanced history class, the tension was thick. Mr. Wallace stood at the front of the room, his usually commanding presence diminished. He avoided making eye contact with Lena, choosing instead to focus intently on his lecture notes. Lena felt a surge of confidence. For weeks, she had endured his condescension and subtle humiliations, but now she wasn't alone. She raised her hand. "Yes, Miss Carter." Mr. Wallace asked, his tone more clipped than usual. Lena spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I wanted to clarify your point about the Reconstruction Amendments. You mentioned they were primarily political tools, but isn't it also true they laid the groundwork for civil rights movements in the 20th century? A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Mr. Wallace hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "That's an interesting perspective," he said finally. For the first time, Lena felt like she had reclaimed a small piece of her power. The rising chorus. Meanwhile, Naomi Carter's coalition of parents was gaining momentum. The stories they had shared at the board meeting were only the beginning. Encouraged by Naomi's leadership and the growing media attention, more families began coming forward with their experiences. Javier, the father whose son had been overlooked for leadership roles, organized a meeting with current and former students. Dozens showed up, each with their own account of subtle biases and systemic inequities. Priya, the mother whose daughter had been criticized for her cultural clothing, spearheaded a petition demanding mandatory diversity training for all faculty members. The petition quickly gained hundreds of signatures, not just from parents, but also from alumni and community members. The movement had grown beyond Bellamy's walls, sparking conversations about bias and accountability in elite educational institutions across the city. Resistance from within. Despite the mounting pressure, there was resistance within Bellamy's ranks. Some faculty members dismissed the allegations as exaggerated, insisting that the school's reputation was being unfairly tarnished. Others quietly supported the movement, but feared speaking out publicly. Dr. Ellis, the headmaster, found himself caught in the crossfire. Privately, he admitted to colleagues that he had underestimated Naomi Carter and the parents she represented. Publicly, he maintained a careful neutrality, promising to consider all perspectives, while avoiding any direct acknowledgement of the systemic issues at play. But the cracks were beginning to show. A local news station aired an in-depth segment on the controversy, featuring interviews with parents and students. The journalist who had written the original expose published a follow-up article, highlighting new allegations and calling for greater accountability. Bellamy's carefully curated image was unraveling, and the administration knew it. Lena takes a stand. For Lena, the growing attention was both a blessing and a burden. She appreciated the support but struggled with the sudden spotlight on her life. She confided in her mother one evening, sitting at the kitchen table as they worked on homework and campaign materials side by side. "Mom," Lena said hesitantly, "I'm glad people are listening, but sometimes it feels like too much, like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to say or do the right thing." Naomi reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on her daughter's. "I know it's a lot, sweetheart," she said gently, "but remember, you're not alone. This isn't just your fight. It's ours, and no one expects you to be perfect. Just be yourself." The next day, Lena decided to take a more active role in the movement. She joined a group of students who had organized a Speak Your Truth event in the school library, inviting anyone who wanted to share their experiences to come forward. The turnout was larger than expected. Students filled the room, some standing against the walls when the chairs ran out. One by one, they took the microphone, recounting moments of bias, exclusion, and microaggressions they had endured. When it was Lena's turn, she hesitated briefly before stepping forward. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "For a long time, I thought it was just me," she said. "I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough or good enough to belong here. But now I know that wasn't true. What's happening at Bellamy isn't just about me. It's about all of us, and it's up to us to change it." Her words were met with thunderous applause. The investigation heats up. Behind the scenes, the investigation into Mr. Wallace and Bellamy's broader culture of bias was intensifying. The school board hired an independent consultant to conduct interviews with students, parents, and faculty members. The findings were damning. Patterns of favoritism, subtle discrimination, and lack of accountability emerged across multiple departments. Mr. Wallace was identified as a repeat offender, his actions corroborated by numerous testimonies. Faced with mounting evidence, the board announced a series of immediate measures. Mr. Wallace was placed on administrative leave pending the conclusion of the investigation. The school committed to implementing mandatory bias training for all staff and establishing an anonymous reporting system for students. These changes were a significant step forward, but Naomi and the coalition weren't satisfied. They continued to push for deeper reforms, including a review of Bellamy's admissions policies and a more diverse hiring process for faculty. The turning point. As Bellamy grappled with its reckoning, Lena found herself growing stronger. She began to see herself not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. Her confidence blossomed, and her academic performance improved as the weight of fear and humiliation lifted. One afternoon, Lena found herself alone in the history classroom after school, organizing her notes. Mr. Wallace entered the room, his usual air of superiority replaced by something almost apologetic. "Miss Carter," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to." Lena cut him off. If you're here to apologize, Mr. Wallace, I appreciate it. But this isn't just about me. It's about the students who came before me and the ones who will come after. They deserve better." Her words left him speechless. As she walked out of the classroom, Lena felt a sense of closure. She had reclaimed her voice, and no one could take it away from her again. The winds of change were sweeping through Bellamy Academy, and while the journey was far from over, Lena and Naomi had proven one thing: silence would no longer be an option. The winds of change. The changes at Bellamy Academy weren't immediate or perfect, but they were real. As the weeks passed, the once hallowed halls of privilege began to shift. For the first time in its history, the school had to confront the deeply ingrained biases it had long ignored. But the process of transformation was as messy as it was necessary. Naomi Carter's coalition of parents continued to grow, their collective voice becoming impossible for the administration to silence. The independent investigation had already led to Mr. Wallace's suspension, but Naomi knew this was only the beginning. Systemic problems required systemic solutions, and she was determined to see the fight through to the end. A community divided. The growing movement within Bellamy sparked heated debates both inside and outside the school. While many parents and students supported the changes, others resisted, claiming the allegations were overblown and damaging to the school's reputation. In online forums and parent group chats, the divide became evident. One parent posted, "Bellamy has been a symbol of excellence for decades. Why are we letting a few complaints ruin everything? These so-called issues are exaggerated." Another quickly countered, "Excellence means nothing if it comes at the expense of fairness and equity. This is about ensuring all students have a chance to succeed." The debate spilled into the student body as well. Some students embraced the opportunity to share their stories, while others mocked the movement, calling it woke drama. For Lena, navigating these dynamics was challenging. Though she had found her voice, the pressure of being a symbol for change weighed heavily on her. New allies. Amid the tension, unexpected allies emerged. One day after school, Lena was approached by a group of seniors she had never spoken to before. They introduced themselves as members of Bellamy's student council and invited her to join their next meeting. "We've been watching everything that's happening," said Mia, the council president, "and we think it's time the student body gets involved in a meaningful way." At the meeting, Lena found herself surrounded by students who were as passionate about change as she was. Together, they brainstormed ways to foster inclusivity at Bellamy, from organizing workshops to creating a peer-led mentorship program for younger students. Their first initiative was a Unity Day, a school-wide event designed to celebrate diversity and promote dialogue. Students were encouraged to share their cultures, experiences, and ideas through art, music, and storytelling. The event was scheduled for the following month, and the council worked tirelessly to make it a success. The Unity Day Challenge. As the date for Unity Day approached, tensions within the school escalated. A small but vocal group of parents and students tried to undermine the event, claiming it was political and divisive. Dr. Ellis, the headmaster, found himself in an unenviable position. While he publicly supported the event, he privately worried about the backlash it might generate. Naomi Carter, however, was unwavering. "Change is never easy," she told Dr. Ellis during a tense meeting. "But if Bellamy wants to remain a leader in education, it needs to lead by example." The pushback didn't deter the student council. Lena worked late into the evenings with her peers, designing posters, coordinating with performers, and ensuring the event reflected the voices of everyone involved. Her confidence grew with each passing day, bolstered by the support of students and teachers who believed in her cause. The day arrives. On the morning of Unity Day, the school grounds were transformed. Colorful banners adorned the hallways, and the air buzzed with anticipation. The event began with a series of student presentations, each one highlighting a different culture or perspective. Lena took the stage midway through the program. Standing under the bright lights of the auditorium, she felt a wave of nervousness but quickly steadied herself. "When I first came to Bellamy, I thought I didn't belong," she began. "I felt small, invisible, and unworthy. But over the past few months, I've learned something important. Belonging isn't about fitting into someone else's idea of who you should be. It's about being proud of who you are and creating a space where others can do the same." The audience erupted in applause as Lena stepped off the stage. Her classmates, even those who had previously ignored or mocked her, clapped and cheered. For the first time, Lena felt like she was part of a community that truly saw her. The ripple effect. The success of Unity Day sent shockwaves through Bellamy. Students who had previously stayed silent began to speak up, sharing their own stories of resilience and perseverance. Teachers who had been hesitant to engage in the movement started incorporating lessons on diversity and inclusion into their curriculums. Naomi's coalition of parents used the event as leverage to push for further reforms. They advocated for the creation of a diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) committee composed of parents, teachers, and students. The school board approved the proposal, marking a significant step forward in Bellamy's transformation. Even Dr. Ellis, who had initially been resistant, began to embrace the changes. In a letter to the Bellamy community, he wrote, "This journey has not been without challenges, but it has also been deeply rewarding. Bellamy's commitment to excellence must include a commitment to equity. I am proud of the steps we have taken, and I look forward to continuing this important work together." Mr. Wallace's reckoning. While the school celebrated its progress, Mr. Wallace's fate hung in the balance. The investigation into his conduct revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior stretching back years. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the school board made the decision to terminate his employment. The news was met with mixed reactions. Some parents and alumni defended Mr. Wallace, praising his contributions to Bellamy's academic programs. But for many students, his removal was a necessary step toward creating a more inclusive environment. For Lena, the news brought a sense of closure. Though she knew the fight for justice was far from over, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Looking ahead, in the weeks that followed, Bellamy continued to evolve. The DEI committee held its first meeting, with Lena as one of the student representatives. The mentorship program launched, pairing younger students with older ones to foster a sense of belonging and support. Naomi, ever the trailblazer, began working with other schools in the district to share Bellamy's journey and encourage similar reforms. Her efforts earned her widespread recognition, but for her, the greatest reward was seeing Lena thrive. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, Lena turned to her mother. "Mom," she said, "thank you. Not just for fighting for me, but for showing me how to fight for myself." Naomi smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You've always had the strength, Lena. You just needed the chance to see it." As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm glow over their neighborhood, mother and daughter sat in peaceful reflection. They had faced the storm together, and now they were ready for whatever came next. Building the future. As the dust settled from the transformative months at Bellamy Academy, the community found itself standing on the edge of something new. The school had taken its first real steps toward equity, but the journey was far from over. For Lena Carter, her mother Naomi, and the students and parents who had rallied together, the changes at Bellamy were only the beginning of a much larger mission. A new normal. Lena's days at Bellamy began to look different. For the first time, she walked through the halls without the weight of shame or fear pressing down on her. The murmurs that had once accompanied her every step were gone, replaced by genuine greetings and nods of respect. In her advanced history class, a new teacher had been appointed to replace Mr. Wallace. Ms. Hernandez was a dynamic educator with a passion for inclusive learning. Her lessons encouraged debate, critical thinking, and a deeper understanding of perspectives often left out of traditional textbooks. Lena thrived in this new environment. Her confidence soared, and her voice, once hesitant, now carried with it the strength of someone who had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity. The DEI Committee. The newly formed Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion (DEI) committee at Bellamy Academy quickly became a cornerstone of the school's transformation. Naomi Carter, alongside a mix of parents, faculty, and students, worked tirelessly to develop policies that would ensure fairness and accountability in all aspects of school life. One of the committee's first initiatives was a review of the curriculum. Textbooks were evaluated for bias, and new materials were introduced to reflect a broader range of voices and histories. Additionally, the admissions process was revamped to prioritize not just academic excellence, but also a commitment to fostering a diverse and inclusive student body. Lena played an active role on the committee. Her experiences gave her a unique perspective, and she often found herself speaking up during meetings, advocating for changes that would benefit not just current students but future generations as well. "I want Bellamy to be a place where no one feels like they don't belong," she said during one meeting. "It's not enough to fix what's broken. We need to build something better." Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone in the room why they were there. Spreading the change. The success of Bellamy's reforms didn't go unnoticed. Other schools in the district began to take note, reaching out to Naomi for guidance. She hosted workshops and panels, sharing the strategies that had worked and the lessons they had learned along the way. One evening, Naomi was invited to speak at a citywide education forum. Standing before an audience of educators, parents, and policymakers, she recounted the journey that had brought Bellamy to this point. "We didn't just fight for change," she said. "We fought for a future where every student feels valued, seen, and heard. And that fight isn't just Bellamy's fight. It's a fight for every school, every classroom, and every child." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and several schools committed to adopting similar initiatives. Lena's legacy. At Bellamy, Lena continued to grow into a leader. She became a mentor in the new peer-led program, guiding younger students who struggled to find their place. She shared her story openly, encouraging others to speak up and reminding them that they weren't alone. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. At the end of the school year, Lena was awarded the school's first-ever Trailblazer Award, created to honor students who exemplified courage, resilience, and a commitment to positive change. As she stood on stage to accept the award, the applause from her peers and teachers was deafening. Looking out at the crowd, Lena felt a swell of pride, not just for herself, but for the community she had helped to build. Reflections and resolutions. At home that evening, Lena and Naomi sat on the back porch, a soft breeze rustling the trees around them. Naomi held the award in her hands, turning it over thoughtfully. "You've come so far, Lena," she said, her voice filled with pride. "But this isn't the end of your journey. It's just the beginning." Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars above. "I know, Mom. There's still so much work to do, but I'm ready." Naomi smiled, placing the award back on the table. "You've taught me something too, you know. Watching you find your voice has reminded me how important it is to never stop fighting for what's right." The two sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. A ripple effect. The changes at Bellamy Academy sparked a ripple effect that extended far beyond its walls. Students who had once felt silenced now felt empowered to speak up. Faculty members who had been hesitant to embrace change began to see its value. Parents who had stayed on the sidelines stepped forward, inspired by Naomi's leadership and Lena's courage. Over the next year, Bellamy became a model for other schools in the region. Its programs were studied, replicated, and celebrated as examples of how institutions could evolve to meet the needs of all students. For Lena, the journey had been transformative. She had started the school year feeling invisible, unsure of her place in the world. Now she was a leader, a trailblazer, and a beacon of hope for others. Looking forward, as summer approached, Lena found herself reflecting on the past year. She thought about the fear and humiliation she had felt in Mr. Wallace's class, the strength her mother had shown in standing up to the school, and the sense of community that had grown out of their fight for justice. She knew there would still be challenges ahead. Change was never easy, and there would always be those who resisted progress. But Lena also knew she had the tools to face whatever came her way. On the last day of school, as she walked through the halls of Bellamy one final time, Lena felt a sense of peace. She had left her mark on this place, and it had left its mark on her. When she stepped outside into the warm sunlight, she saw her mother waiting for her by the car. Naomi waved, her smile bright and full of pride. "Ready for the next chapter?" she asked as Lena climbed into the passenger seat. "More than ready," Lena replied, her voice steady and confident.